I have
Or so,
plenty of anecdotal information about abusive men from complementarian households, but the vast majority of men in complementarian households are not abusive.
On something. I don't know if you have read the book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Bar. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. Are you?
I've kind of paged a little bit through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things she claims, so she kind of she says she skirted the fringes of the Bill Gothard movement. She tells some stories in the book. Now, overall, I'm not a huge fan of this book. In fact, I've done a couple
No,
podcasts
right. You're not.
about it. But I want to maybe have you guys help us unpack something. So, she told about some of the Gothard teachings, which we would all agree are unbiblical, right? We would agree that those are not biblical teachings. But then she connects those with the doctrine of complementarianism. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but if anybody's unfamiliar with that term, I think a broad, just kind of 30,000-foot definition of that is just the biblical teaching that men and women are equal in value and worth and dignity, but they have different roles to play in the church and the home. That's essentially at the bottom of complementarianism. Now, in the book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood, I just want to read this quote and get your guys' thoughts on this, because I think that one of the most important things we can do for people who might find themselves in cultic types of churches or environments is learning how to untie the knots and not throw out the whole baby with the bathwater just because maybe there was an abuse of a doctrine. So she says this: I only skirted the fringes of the Bill Gothard movement, but I can tell you from experience that it was a whitewashed tomb. I think we would agree so far. But then she goes on. She says she told a friend that she was thinking maybe there's a link between complementarianism and abuse. And her friend said, no, there's no proof to that. And here's what she says. This is a declaration she makes in her book. She says, but there is. We can no longer deny a link between complementarianism and abuse. And so she's essentially saying that if you teach people that men and women have different roles to play in the home and in the church, and that maybe even our biology might indicate what those roles should be. As a woman, for example, my body was designed to bear children and to feed newborn babies. And that should tell me something about what the newborn baby needs from me and what my role might be to play in that. We're living in a culture that would say that's crazy talk, that's old-fashioned, that's abusive to women to say that, to even hint that perhaps a woman should stay home with her child or something along those lines. Help our audience with that. And we'll start with you, Don. How might you, for somebody who's saying, look, I wonder if complementarianism does lead to abuse. Did that lead to a Bill Gothard? How could we untie those knots?
okay, there's a difference between what something teaches and how someone may misuse it. That's a really important aspect. So you just use the word authority, for example. Well, what does that mean? You have to start now defining it. And biblically, um, let me do it this way. I like word pictures better. You have a difference between being a cattle driver and a shepherd. Both of them may get the job done, but one of them is more volatile than the other,
Mm.
right? And we are called as pastors to be shepherds, not cattle drivers. We are called as husbands to be shepherds, not cattle drivers. And so it starts with husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we are living that way, I have to tell you something. Those that you are leading, and that's the key word, leading, will follow because you're a good leader. They may do what you demand because you're abusive, but that's not the same thing as leading. And that's how I'd phrase it. I'll be married 54 years this year, and my wife still likes me, which is a really plus.
That's a good sign.
That's an accomplishment, huh?
Yeah, but my task is to serve her to the best of my ability, to help her be the best that she can. And there are areas where she submits because I'm the head of the house, not because I'm the boss of her. There's a difference between the two.
Mm.
And that is often missed. And unfortunately, Gothardism attracts some, not all, but some who are already abusive and then take his teachings as sort of a credit card to behave badly.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
So it isn't essential in a teaching. It is a misuse of the teaching
Yeah.
by those who already are abusive.
Right. Like you can't say that we should have no leadership because
Right.
there are leaders who are abusive. Yeah. Ron, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah. I don't know how much this counts, Don, but I can vouch for you. I've watched their marriage for the last 30 years of our relationship. But the reason I don't know if it counts is because I'm just a cisgendered white male. So,
That's right. Your
uh,
opinion does not count at all. You get no
I
opinion.
also, I also happen to think complementarianism is the way to go. And thankfully, I
Yeah.
have a wife who doesn't want to be the head of the house.
I don't either. I don't either. Trust me.
So it's like it kind of works out well when you have that situation. But what happens when you don't have a wife who's happy in that role? You'll end up with conflict, and I think a lot of the result of the conflict may be interpreted as abuse. But it's really interesting. There was a study done in the Journal of Family Violence in published in 2012, February 2012. The title of it was "Relationship Between Egalitarianism, Dominance, and Violence in Intimate Relationships." And the study was probably buried because it said things that people just really aren't happy about. One of the quotes is, "A women's own high egalitarian attitude and high dominance score were associated with higher victimization of men."
Wow.
Uh, Another thing in the study, studies examining men's and women's use of physical violence indicate that the number of women using physical aggression is either comparable to that of men or higher than that of men.
Wow.
What they found was is that apparently a lot of men for some reason just don't want to hit their wives, even though they could. But there are a lot of women who, well, like it
Yeah.
says, so the studies have not borne out, uh, at least not. I mean, I forget if I read that portion of the book of Barr's book, uh, and if I looked for documentation, because that's what I look for. What
Yeah.
studies and what are you basing this in? Is it anecdotal information
Right.
or is it a study like the one I found here?
Right.
Right.
Um, I have
Our sim-
plenty of anecdotal information about abusive men from complementarian households. But the vast majority of men in complementarian households are not abusive. And I think some of the more left of center or progressive women in the church have basically admitted that,
Hmm.
that they can't, there's not enough evidence to establish any kind of causal relationship.
Yeah.
And, this, as far as the Gothard connection to it is concerned, I mean, I I was taught complementarianism before they invented the word, before the word was coined in the 1990s. Um, I was not to be telling tales out of school, but I got a call from Wayne Grudem when I was working at Wheaton in Foundation and Corporate Relations because he was looking for funding for the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, and I kind of landed in the role of a grant proposal writer there, and he asked me if I could find somebody to give, find funding for CBMW. And as soon as he said it, I just like turned white. I mean, whiter than I am. Uh, and I said, we didn't have, digital resources really back then. And so I knew this was going to be a huge challenge finding someone with that narrow an interest. He sent me a copy of the book, uh, Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. And I remember thinking, oh, complementarianism. Yeah, this is found in Charles Ryrie's book, Balancing the Christian Life, that was published 1960 something. I mean, this is not new.
Right.
right.
Uh, this is the idea that the man is the head of the house now, and should be the only male should be pastors in the church and so on, is not new. Now, some of the stuff that I've heard and even read, is it wrong for a woman to be a police officer? Okay, That's not the way I was taught complementarianism
Right.
when I was in Bible college. Is it wrong for a woman to work outside the home? Well, I was raised with a grandmother and a mother who worked outside the home. Uh,
Yeah.
and, so no,
Well,
I
there's
couldn't
like
find.
there's a spectrum to it too. You can ask 10 complementarians how they define it, and you're going to get 10 different kind of places they fall on the spectrum. But no, that's
Yeah,
very
no, yeah.
helpful. That's very helpful. Now there's so many places we can go. We are like coming close to being out of time.
Oh,
I
May I
no.
don't want.
very
Go
quick?
ahead, Don.
Very quick. Okay. I would suggest getting the book 95 Theses for a New Reformation. Chapter 9
Okay.
deals directly with this question of headship. Very biblical. Dr. Don Williams does a great job with that. That's one. Two, we have an article on our website, the cult of godly womanhood, done
Mm.
by Karen Campbell. She does an excellent job on this topic. Three, I want to just mention the Proverbs 31 woman. This is very important in this whole discussion because without the Proverbs 31 man, you wouldn't have the Proverbs 31 woman who did real estate transactions. She took care of the home. She did all these kinds of things. And we don't even know. I mean, my line is we don't even know if the guy had a job. Uh, right? He didn't have a problem with her doing the kinds of things that she was doing outside the home.
Yeah.
And yet she's held up as the example for women today. What about the Proverbs 31 man? Where's he in all this equation? That's an important thing. And he rises up and calls her blessed. That's the end of that.
That's good. Very good. I always liked the Proverbs 31 woman because it said her arms are strong for her tasks, and I always had kind of like more muscly arms, and I thought, see, she had buff arms too. It's okay.